Thanks for having me. If you were hoping to get inspiration from me, you're kind of in the wrong place. Or at least, Mr. Hill, you invited the wrong guy, because I'm not so big on inspiration. I'm kind of bigger on cynicism. So my sort of hope for you is look around, right? Look around. And look at your classmates, look at where you are, look at your faculty. Hopefully, inspiration is a daily experience for you. Hopefully, it's something that marks your time here at this school. And hopefully, what I'm about to give you, which is going to be despair and depression, is far rarer and therefore reserved to ceremonial occasions like this one. And the reason I'm sort of filled with despair and depression is because I work on inequality. So my days are spent looking at census figures, right? Nothing could be more depressing, and the gaps between rich and poor people, and what explain the gaps between rich and poor people. And the lessons from the kind of work that I do are fairly obvious, which is also fairly depressing. That is, your parents are right, the faculty around you are right, the best way to move ahead in the world is actually to stay in school. This is not going to be a public service message, so don't worry that it's going to be all about stay in school. But I can imagine some of you are thinking, Mark Zuckerberg didn't finish college, and he's a lot richer than you are, Khan. We'd be happier to have him here than you. So why should we finish college? And my response to you would be, you're not the next Mark Zuckerberg. Or at least chances are pretty good that you're not the next Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook's already been invented, and he's kind of a 1 in a billion kind of person, and each one of you is a 1 in 6 billion kind of person, so maybe that's even better, but still, I'm sorry if I'm the first person to have told you this, but you're probably not going to be a billionaire. And if you followed Mark Zuckerberg's footsteps and decided not to go to school, you would enter into a kind of an America that lots of Americans live in, which is to say that there's about 40% of our population that never went to college, no college at all, and they make, on average, around, if you're a man, you'll make about $25,000 a year. If you're a woman, you'll make about 16. So another depressing piece of information. There's huge disparities in the wages of men and women, particularly those who are poor. And you're going to have to live with somebody else because to live on $25,000 a year is incredibly hard. Maybe you'll live with somebody else because you fall in love, which would be nice, but in general it's because you can't afford to live alone. And so you'll end up living in a household that earns about $36,000 a year. And if that doesn't seem like a lot of money, it's not a lot of money. It's not poverty, but keep in mind that there's 120 million Americans who live on less than $34,000 a year, which is a lot of people out there. And your chance of being Mark Zuckerberg among the dropouts, pretty low. So stay in school, because if you finish college, you're going to make about $72,000 a year on average, which is pretty good, right? You should feel pretty good about that. It's certainly better than 36. I can do math. And then you'll be among the wealthier third of Americans. You'll basically be in the top third of our society, which sounds pretty good until you start to think about the kind of institution that I teach at. So it's a good thing. Anybody here from Columbia? Alan? Yeah, don't tell them what I'm about to say, because I'm about to make a lot of fun of my institution, or at least tell you a series of depressing things about my institution. Which is to say that if you wanted to go to Columbia, you can, okay? You all can go there. But unfortunately, there's a lot of money that goes into keeping somebody like me alive and keeping the institution afloat. And the bill ends up being, around $55,000, $60,000 a year, which is more than what almost 2/3 of Americans make. That's to send one student to Columbia. Now, you may say to yourself, but wait, there's a lot of financial aid out there. And it's true, Columbia is one of the best schools in the country in terms of providing financial aid. We give it to about half our students, which should make you think, wait, okay, so half the people come from a group of families that can't afford $60,000 a year, 55, to send one of their kids to this school. But that also means that the other half does. And you begin to think about this for a moment. What part of society do you have to be in order to afford $60,000 a year for one kid to go to school? And you basically need to be within the top 5% of American earners, which means that half of our incoming class comes from within the top 5% of American earners. Now, in my world, it's difficult to imagine how this is part of a great equality move in the United States, how it represents a tremendous amount of the realization of a kind of American dream where when you look at these super elite schools, the kind of place where I teach, half the class comes from within the top 5% richest American families. The question is, how does it happen? Why does it happen? And what's this going to look like in the future? And again, depression and despair. And part of the reason is that schools like the one I teach at are getting more and more expensive. But the average American salary is actually declining. So, census data came out this week, and I was up all night looking at it for the past 4 days. That's what I do with my life. And you know what we saw from the census data that just came out was that for the first time in a while, median American earnings are declining. So we went from having on average an American family make about $50,000 a year to making about 48, which is depressing. And actually the last time the peak earnings in the United States we saw was 1999. Some of you may have been born in 1999, which is also depressing to me. Right? I mean, not that you were born then, it's that I'm that old. When did I graduate high school? 96. Yeah, that's bad. So if you can imagine, we have this tremendous shift in the American life. And you might ask yourself, well, if incomes are going down, what's happening to the money in America? Because as you look around, it seems like there's actually a lot of money in America. We are going through a recession right now. But here, the data again show a degree of depression and despair. Because since 1968, almost all of the increases in wealth in the United States have been seized by the top 10% of American earners. In other words, the bottom 90% of American society has not really seen much of a tangible shift in their earnings, or really their standard of living, for the last 40 years. By contrast, if you're in the top 1 or 0.1% of American families, you've experienced a 500% raise in your earnings. It's pretty dramatic if you think about it, but it's also fairly obvious. That is, if the bottom 90% isn't doing any better, and there's more money around, where is it going? Top 10%. And actually, beyond this, the top 1% and even the top 0.1%. So why does Columbia keep getting more and more expensive? Because the population, half the population that we serve, can actually pay it. And there's tremendous increases in the amount of money that they have. And so institutions like mine grow and grow and grow and grow. Okay, so what should you take away from this? Well, depression and despair. But I'm going to hopefully leave you with a set of 3 lessons that should guide you while you're in college. 3 lessons that are not so depressing, and maybe you can leave the despair to me, but will hopefully sort of push you forward in thinking about your experience in college, what it means for your future, and what it means for the other people around you in this world who don't, say, enjoy the inspiration that they might get from a place like Williston on a daily basis or from the colleges that you're about to attend in a year from now. So a year from now, many of you, you'll be sitting in front of somebody like me. which is terrifying, with more depression and despair. Get used to it. High school teachers are full of inspiration. College teachers, they're not so much. They're like me. So as you head off to college, and as you move into this next phase of your life, remember that the experience that you're going to have there is actually not representative. So I guarantee you, when you end up on any campus you go to, what's going to happen is the admissions officer is going to sit you all down, and they're going to say, "You are the most diverse, interesting group of kids anywhere." And it doesn't matter what school you're going to go to, this speech is going to happen. And they're going to tell you you're a microcosm of the world around you. And then they're going to tell fascinating and weird stories about each one of you. And if you follow your class president's advice, maybe you can be the person who has the weird story told about you, which would be nice because it's a good way to make friends. People will know who you are pretty early on in your college career, which is, more important than knowing somebody like me. But remember, as you listen to this speech, that it's basically not true. That the vast majority of Americans don't go to college. So only about 30%, maybe for your cohort, for your like age generation, it'd be about 35%, will end up in college. Most Americans will have an experience that's very different than your own, particularly after you leave college. And more importantly, that many of the people around you have had to work pretty hard to get to college, just like you will. We'll get to that point. But that in general, they'll have lived a life of comparative privilege, say, to the rest of the nation. This then requires a degree of humility of you as you enter these institutions and you understand your place there, and in particular, the place of people who aren't there. The second point that I'd make to you is that, and this is actually another depressing point, but it's going to have a happier ending, is that we in America live in an incredibly segregated society, by which I mean that compared to many other places even in the world, first world nations, as we might call them, we have a lot of residential segregation. So wealthy people tend to live near one another, and they tend to live kind of far away from poor people. White people tend to live near other white people and tend to try and live far away from other people who aren't white. It's not a happy story. College will actually be pretty different for you. And I think you should take advantage of this because, in general, schools try to construct intentional communities of diversity that are quite different than the experience of an average American household, or in general, quite different than the experience of an average American community. So take advantage of that kind of difference. Take advantage of the kind of difference that you enjoy here and the lessons that you've learned from it, and bring it also with you to college. The third is to suggest that just because there are a lot of wealthy people at college doesn't mean people don't work hard to get into college. So Columbia's acceptance rate is something like 7%. I don't know. Is there a college counselor here? They could probably tell me. I don't know. I don't accept anybody. So I'll be at the senior dinner later, or the desserts thing. Don't ask me to help you get into school. I'm not going to. I can't. My recommendation might hurt. But it's incredibly difficult to get into Columbia. It's incredibly difficult to get into most colleges. You're all going to get into college. It's going to be all right. But you're going to have to work hard to get there. And once you're there, you're going to also have to work hard. And one of the sort of happier pieces of data that I see, it's related to one of the sadder pieces of data that I see. The sadder piece of data is that people don't work that hard in college, so it gets easier. But people who do work harder in college have better career trajectories. They tend to be healthier and happier. So if you do work hard in college, there will be rewards to this. But the idea that just because there are a lot of wealthy people at college means that everybody at college is lazy is untrue. In fact, most of you are going to have to work pretty hard to get in, and once you're there, you're going to have to work pretty hard. But keep in mind that just because you're working pretty hard and you had to work pretty hard to get in, The extension of that is not that people who aren't at college are lazy or don't want to do any work. Oftentimes, they haven't been afforded the kinds of advantages that you've been afforded. So again, I'd encourage you to have a degree of humility in enjoying the rewards of college. So with that depression and despair, you can be happy about one thing, which is that I'm pretty sure I didn't go over my 25 minutes that I was allotted, so you get to eat soon, right? So you can be happy with one thing at least that I did today. Thank you for the honor of having me, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful year this year and in the years to come.